That ringing sound means that it is the beginning of the European history lesson for Wednesday, the 27th of April, 2022. And we were at the dawn of the age of World War I, when an Austrian emigre to Munich, Germany, had petitioned the King of Bavaria to allow him to join the Bavarian army, which is part of the Imperial German army, rather than having to go back to the miscegenated, polyglot Austro-Hungarian forces with all those non-Germans. Yes?
You mean World War II, or are you back to
World War I. World War I. We're back at the beginning of World War I. Remember Hitler happy in Munich as part of the crowd? Yes, that's where we are.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've gone back.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, later, the palace of the Wittelsbach family, who ruled Bavaria at the time, said that the paperwork got mishandled because he was approved. And instead of having to go back to Austria and serve in their military, he got to join the Bavarian army. And he actually served with great distinction in the First World War. Hitler was part of the German reinforcements that went into the Second Battle of Ypres. And so he was fighting the British in late 1914, first year of the war. He gets an Iron Cross second class, which is one of the higher German distinctions, equivalent maybe to a Bronze Star. After surviving this, he becomes a courier. Please make sure you have your notes there. A courier, you would think, oh, he's getting out of infantry duty. He's just carrying messages. Yes. From one forward outpost to the next. Instead of going straight at the enemy as part of a big attack, he has to move sideways across the front every day, several times. It's actually a much more dangerous job in some respects than assault infantry. Hitler does this for years. He makes some of the only friends he's ever had in the trenches. He has a dog that he keeps and is very devoted to the dog. And he is proud to be of service to his empire. He wins the Iron Cross First Class, which is the Imperial German Army's equivalent of the Silver Star, which is a very big award for personal bravery in the face of the enemy. And so he is in the front lines of combat from late 1914 until the middle of 1918, when his unit is gassed. Hitler is temporarily blinded. He survives and goes to a hospital. When he is gassed, the St. Michael Offensive, the Kaiserschlacht, the big German offensive of 1918, has petered out, but the Germans are still very powerful and very much inside of France and Belgium. When he comes to his senses and gets his eyesight back and his health begins to stabilize, he's in a different world. He's won the German equivalent of the Purple Heart, which is the medal everyone gets when they're wounded in battle. So, for a German soldier, he's highly decorated. He was promoted to corporal within the first 9 months of his service. He was never promoted after that, not to sergeant. And there are probably reasons for that. But Corporal Hitler was a frontline combat veteran with a really impressive service history. But he wakes up to a different world. First of all, he's physically weakened by the experience of being gassed. He has suicidal thoughts. But the world he's woken up to is the world after the armistice. Germany has lost the war, suddenly, from his point of view. And not only has Germany lost the war, the Versailles terms that are coming down are really, from his point of view, horrible. What the hell happened? To make matters worse, in late 1919, a Bavarian Soviet Republic is declared, which rules Bavaria for a few months. in preparation for a German revolution, a German communist revolution. So there's chaos. This Soviet Republic in Bavaria is overthrown by a group of army veterans called the Freikorps, the Free Corps. And they basically reestablish Weimar government. Hitler is lost. His camaraderie with the men in the trenches is over because the war is over. He wasn't killed straight out. He was wounded a way that required many months of hard recovery. And he comes back into a world that he doesn't want to live in. And he didn't fit into the world of peace before. What's going to make him fit into the world of peace now? Well, he has a connection in the Munich police department. And he is basically offered the job of being a police spy. Not quite an agent provocateur, but a mole. Because politics has gone crazy in Weimar, Germany. With the abdication of the Kaiser. Yep, it's raining. I love the rain. When I'm inside. And even when I'm outside sometimes. I miss the rain. In New England, it rains so much more often than it does here, especially in the summertime. We don't have any rain practically from mid-June until September.
If it starts snowing, I'm going to lose my crap.
Now I want it to start snowing. Anyway,
It's almost May, and I
just remember, elect Haley. If it snows, she will lose her stuff. Yes.
I will.
That inspires confidence. So,
does anybody like the snow in May?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hitler, I had snow in June. Deal with it. Okay. So,
Not allowed. Colorado weather right here.
Hitler takes the job,
Go back to Colorado.
and one of his first assignments is to infiltrate and join Anton Drexler's German Workers' Party. Deutsche Arbeiterspartei. And Hitler shows up. And he is found home. They think as he does. They're anti-Semites like he is. They believe in secret cabals and conspiracies that rule the world from the shadows like he does. They believe the German army was stabbed in the back like he does by Jews and Socialists like he does. And they're not as good a speaker as he is, and they're not as focused a thinker as he is. So very quickly, within a few weeks, Hitler stops being a police spy for the German Workers' Party, and he ends up taking a leadership role and renames it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, fusing the two dominant ideologies from the 19th century, nationalism and socialism. So it's now the Nationalsozialist Deutsche Arbeiterspartei. And again, I have lousy accents because I don't really speak German. In any event, Drexler is quickly sidelined, and Hitler becomes the leader of the NSDAP. Now, he makes some interesting context. First of all, he is a compelling speaker. He's still learning his craft, but he is a beguiling speaker, and he has focus, and he can inspire the emotions of the people in the audience. He can inspire them to be afraid, angry, hopeful. They're putty in his hands. He's basically, in modern terms, a charismatic pop star. And through the his leadership in the NSDAP, Hitler meets war heroes like Hermann Goering. Goering is a Prussian aristocrat who ended up taking over for the Red Baron after he was shot down by the British. Hermann Goering leads what is called the Flying Circus, which is Baron von Richthofen's personal squadron of elite fighter pilots. So this guy is also a celebrity. He's a war hero. He's upper class, and he's associated with Hitler. Erich Ludendorff. Erich Ludendorff, who was the second, actually in some ways the most important ruler of Germany during the mid and late World War. Erich Ludendorff, who worked for Hindenburg, who worked for the Kaiser. But the Kaiser was detached from details, and Hindenburg was an old man who was good at inspiring people, and he was good at making decisions. He was a bit like George Washington in the sense that he was a big picture guy. But Ludendorff is the guy who in detail ran the war. Ludendorff and Goering both joined the NSDAP, as do others. Now, Hitler sees the party as revolutionary, and he sees the time as opportune in November of 1923. At the Oh, I'm going to say the Lowenbrau Keller. It's a beer hall. I'm forgetting the name of the beer hall. Germany has something that the United States does not have, especially in Munich, the home of Oktoberfest. It has these places called beer halls. At a beer hall, like in an English pub, you can get simple food and you can get beer. And there are these long trestle tables with long benches, and you go there with your mates and you sit down. And unlike the Anglo-Saxons, the Germans, when they drink, become happy and bubbly. Aye, 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 aye. They stand, they sing, they swing their beer steins. I'm here, and you're here, and we're here together. And it's this whole beer culture. And again, it's generally very happy and positive. And since the NSDAP is an obscure fringe party, they meet in a beer hall. Well, Hitler decides that now is the time, in November of 23. He's got Goering, he's got Ludendorff, he's got connections in the police. And Hitler believes that if the National Socialists march on the police station in Munich, the police will join them. And with the police, the NSDAP, the Nazis, can take over Munich. And with Munich, they can take over Bavaria, and with Bavaria, they can inspire National Socialist uprisings throughout the rest of Germany, and Germany will become a new type of country, a Volksgemeinschaft, a brotherhood of all Germans under the National Socialist Party. But first, he's got to take the Munich police station. So, long story short, there's a lot of ins and outs to the story. Hitler and his coterie of Nazis Hitler is whipping the Nazis up into a froth, and he says, "Now is the time!" Boom! And he shoots his pistol up into the ceiling. The bullet hole is still there in the beer hall, which is still there. And they surge out of the beer hall, and they're moving across the city of Munich towards the police station. Now, the police have spies, other than Hitler, in the National Socialists, and they know what's happening. So they set up a block in a plaza about halfway to the police station. Hitler and his men come. He's got Goering on one side. He's got Ludendorff on the other. Hitler's wearing a long trench coat and a little fedora hat. Looks like a gangster. And the police say, "Stop, this is an unlawful demonstration. Disperse to your homes." And Hitler says, "They're not going to shoot at us. They're our friends. They're nationalists like us. It's going to be fine." And they march on. Goering gets hit. Goering gets hit and has to be evacuated, I think, to Switzerland. He escapes. And with his money, he is treated there with heavy pain-killing meds. And Goering is going to become a morphine addict on and off for the rest of his life. One of the reasons he balloons in weight and develops truly bizarre, out-there tastes is because the man is either constantly fighting opium addiction, not opioid, opium, it's stronger. And when he's not fighting opium addiction, he's giving into it. So Goering is out. Everyone dives and runs, including Hitler, who's found in a cellar a few hours later. Ludendorff is the only one who doesn't. He stands there, proudly. This is the man who ruled Germany, in fact, in the name of Hindenburg, in the name of the Kaiser, but Ludendorff called the shots. And the police walked up and said, "Sir, Your Excellency, we must take you into custody." And he says, "Fine." Very dignified and very contemptuous. But Ludendorff is going to have less and less to do with the Nazis as time goes on. Hitler is put on trial. It is broadcast on radio. And Hitler insists on defending himself. So in Hitler's trial over what is called the beer hall putsch, a putsch is a coup d'etat. That's what the Germans call a coup d'etat. If you don't know what a coup d'etat is in Spanish, it's golpe de estado. If you don't know what a golpe de estado is, or a coup d'etat, or a putsch, it's when a small group uses force to take over a country. It's not quite a popular revolution. It's not quite a military dictatorship. Military can engage in coups, but a putsch is a small group of armed men. Had the Italian government stood up to Mussolini and lost, Mussolini would have taken over Italy in a putsch or in a coup d'etat. So Hitler's on trial basically for treason. And treason is one of those things that still carries the death penalty even today in most countries. You're allowed to do many things. You're not allowed to betray your people. That's one of the basic laws of civilization. So Hitler's going to defend himself, which is something any lawyer will tell you is a foolish thing, but Hitler isn't trying to get acquitted. Hitler is going to use the trial, and the judge is going to let him. Hitler speechifies during the trial, and he convinces anyone who is willing to give him a credulous ear that only Hitler is standing up for what Germany should be. That the Jews and socialists who run the republic are traitors, and that the timid policemen who work for these traitors are, by extension, traitors. The German people deserve better. We don't need to live in the shadow of Versailles. We don't need to live like defeated people. We just have to take heart, be courageous, be bold enough to seize history by the throat, make it give us what we want. Hitler is found guilty, but is given an extremely lenient sentence. A short prison term at Landsberg prison. But he doesn't get stuck in the cells with the regular prisoners. Hitler and his fellow elite Nazis get a suite of rooms that's isolated. Yeah, they're still in prison. Hitler rooms with a guy who becomes his secretary and then deputy Führer, a man named Rudolf Hess. But they have these rooms, these double occupancy rooms, and a common room, and they make their own meals, and they basically keep to themselves, and they're basically elite prisoners. Now, in the United States, at least in the past, if you were a member of the mafia, if you were an elite member of organized crime and had money and push, you might be treated this way. This was true in the 50s and 60s. I don't know if it's still true. But if you have money and influence, you can get special treatment inside prisons. It's disgraceful. So Hitler is treated like a special prisoner. He's given a typewriter, he's given paper, he has visitors, he's given newspapers, and the guards, many of them are sympathetic to what Hitler said in the trial and to what they think Nazism stands for. Hitler is not the only person in the world who's going to take the enforced inactivity of prison and use it as the opportunity to write a book. Hitler's book is called Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf means my struggle. What is Hitler's struggle? The struggle of the German people. To slough off the parasitical Jews. To break free of Anglo-Saxon capitalism. To distinguish themselves from the Celts and the Gauls and the Slavs and the other lesser peoples of the world. To embrace their status as Übermensch, as supermen. By an act of will to transcend their limitations and become who they really are, the natural rulers of the world, the master race. What are we going to do? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to reorient society on the basis of nationalism and on the basis of race. One thing that Germany needs for autarky, economical self-sufficiency, is Lebensraum. Lebensraum, which is a word you should write down. I'll put it right here. Lebensraum. That's living space. L-E-B-E-N, and it's Nancy, S-R-A-U-M. Lebensraum. And from Hitler's point of view, the slave race of the Slavs, the Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Poles, Russians, White Russians, Ukrainians, are naturally occupying a bunch of really good soil that the Germans would use better. So Germany's destiny is to march eastward and seize the Slavic lands and return the Slavs to a state of mythical slavery. The Germans will be a master race of a country that stretches from Alsace-Lorraine to the Ural Mountains. Russia, gone. All the other countries in that part of the world under German dominion, directly or indirect. And that's going to mean war. But Hitler says very clearly, we should never fight a two-front war. We have Western enemies and Eastern enemies. We fight them one at a time. Avoid a two-front war. That's going to come back to it's Hitler's analysis, and he's not wrong, that if Germany had only had to fight the Western Allies in World War I or the Russians in World War I, Germany would have won pretty darn handily, and they probably would have, at least for a while. Mein Kampf, my struggle, has a similar connotation to the word jihad in Islam. Jihad means struggle in the name of Allah. Now, that struggle can be to lose weight by dieting and exercising. Or that struggle can be to quit smoking. Or that struggle can be to be nice when you have a naturally salty disposition, when you have a sarcastic, snarky sense of humor. And instead of cutting the people around you to ribbons, you restrain yourself and you be a little more dull and a little more boring and a little less obnoxious. That's all self-struggle. That's all jihad. Jihad, of course, also means Islamic holy war against the infidel. The sorts of things that conquered Persian Empire, half the Roman Empire and Byzantine Empire, and almost conquered Europe. The reason that of all the wars in the world since the end of the Cold War, over 80% of them have involved Muslims in some way, shape, or form. So jihad can mean both self-struggle and struggle out in the world. Struggle to make yourself better for God and struggle to make the world better for God. And Mein Kampf is similarly about the struggle of Germans to be their best selves, but also to identify their enemies and bring their enemies under their will. Hitler is released from prison early with his private secretary, Rudolf Hess, who did most of the typing, publishes his book, goes back to the leadership of the NSDAP, and for the rest of the 1920s prepares for the next crisis. This is something you've got to understand. Communists, National Socialists, other revolutionary parties are not interested in peace and prosperity because no one in their right mind would choose a totalitarian system to govern them in a time of peace and prosperity. Only the true ideologues, only the zealots who believed in the millenarian promises of the Nazis or the communists would ever give up the kind of freedom necessary to build a utopian totalitarian police state. But when crises happen, when people are hungry, when people are desperate, when people are afraid, then they can be stampeded like cattle. Then they can be made to either support or succumb to a totalitarian revolution. And that's what's happening. That's what at least Hitler is hoping for. Just as the Communist Party of Germany is hoping for a similar thing. And when the Great Depression happens, their opportunity arrives. But before we get to that, let's talk about some Nazi ideas, National Socialist dogmas. First of all, in this sense, it's Hegelian. It's a synthesis. Thesis, nationalism. Antithesis, socialism. Synthesis, National Socialism. Blending together the idea that all members of the nation state, all members of the Volk, V-O-L-K means Volk, Volk, it means the German nation, and it is something that has more resonance than simply the English word F-O-L-K. Folk means us, our tribe, our blood, our heritage, our legacy and tradition. That's more important than any social class distinction. Marx was a liar. Marx was trying to divide people by social class when they're really divided by race and culture. So we define ourselves as a nation of people. Now, we're not all equal. We don't all do the same job. The nation has a hierarchy with it. But as socialists, our job is to take care of everyone in society and to make sure that everyone in the society works for the common good, so that the German nation can be more than the sum of its parts. Like a human body is more than a few 100 million cells that happen to be connected. because we have a central nervous system, because we have a brain and a mind, because we can interact on this broader level that cells couldn't perceive, this time and space thing that we perceive in Newtonian fashion. All of that is because we are more than the sum of our parts. National Socialism, by caring for all the parts, but by seeing their common identity, will marshal the nation-state to transcend its identity as a group of atomized individuals to become a Hobbesian leviathan, an organism that interacts on a scale that the individual cannot perceive, that seizes history and pursues a destiny that only something like an awakened national consciousness can achieve. Now, if this sounds mystical, it is. Communism tends to be idealistic, but pretty hyper-rationalistic as well. It talks about economics and so forth. But there is a weakness in that. The strength of National Socialism is that nationalism is romantic. Yeah, you probably won't. Nationalism is romantic. And romanticism, the connection to the passions, are something, I suppose if you can pay attention to both things, that's fine. I just don't want to be distracted. Already being doing. He seems to be paying attention too, so that's okay. I don't know what's wrong with me. I must be getting soft in my old age. Yep. So, by harnessing the romanticism of nationalism, the sense of opera that's in nationalism, National Socialism becomes more intense than communism, more fervent than communism, and in some ways more dangerous. If it was a virus, it would be more communicable than the virus of communism. So, there's the idea that we saw explored in the movie Metropolis, which is a pre-Nazi movie, made by a guy who ended up having to flee Nazi Germany, Fritz Lang. Metropolis is the science fiction movie set in 2025, 100 years after the film was made, in a city where the workers live underground, and then at ground level are the great machines, and then above, in the skylights and penthouses, are the elite. And the sun, it's a silent movie. And the son of the elite meets this beautiful lady, Maria, and pursues her into the depths and discovers the machines and sees Moloch, the devil that eats children, in one of the machines. I've showed you clips. You may or may not remember when we were doing the Industrial Revolution. But the solution to the problem of the Tower of Babel to modern factories, that the head that plants has no sympathy for the hands that create. The hands that create do not know the grand and glorious designs of the head that plants. Between the head and the hands must intercede the heart, something that has compassion for both. The heart that can explain the grand design to the workers, why they must sacrifice. The heart that can explain to the head why they need to moderate their fervor for the sake of the humanity of the people making all this happen. And that warm and fuzzy heart that will unify the head that plans and the hands that do is the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Just as in Italy, it's the fascist party, the fascisti. I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating. That's their role in society, to be the central nervous system interceding between here and here. Ultimately, the goal is called Volksgemeinschaft. Volksgemeinschaft is the brotherhood of all Germans. And a Nazi ritual is established in all the communities of Germany where they have a strong presence before they take power, and even more widely after they take power. Once a week, every German sits down together at a common meal, a simple meal, lentil soup and brown bread and beer. The factory owner sits next to the janitor, sits next to the auto mechanic, sits next to the farmer, sits next to the housewife and mother. All Germans of all kinds sing songs. They tell stories. They listen to speeches. They enjoy being one people together. Now, I'll tell you, there's a power in this. Churches used to do that in the United States because churches, when they were something that most people were part of, they weren't just some communities had the rich church, they were the Presbyterians, and the poor churches, they were the Catholics or the Baptists. And but most of the time, churches took a pretty good cross section of society. And so when you gathered to worship, and then when you stuck around for fellowship, or when you did church events, there you were, working side by side with people otherwise who you'd never see. I mean, you'd know about the factory owner in his office, but you'd never work with him, you'd never joke with him, you'd never talk with him, you'd never find out his foibles. And as for the factory owner, why would he know about the life story or the difficulties of one of his workers, let alone a janitor? This ritual of Volksgemeinschaft, the brotherhood of all Germans, was designed to build what in modern civic terms is community spirit. And it works for those who are true believers. For those who are true believers, this is what the future will look like. The National Socialist future will be like this dinner, like this lunch, really a lunch. We'll all get together, we'll all swap stories. You've got your job, I've got mine, you live in your mansion, I live in my apartment. But we're in this together. You're not my enemy. I'm not your enemy. The idea of class warfare, it's like cancer. You don't want the body's life forces fighting itself. Instead of it being a cancer, maybe to the extent we're different organs in the body. I don't know how I rated becoming the spleen, but I guess I did. And one of the things that unifies this, and this is the positive idea of Nazism, no successful ideology can be a pure negative. No successful leader can be a pure negative either. You don't have countries self-consciously led by mustache-twirling villains. I will destroy mankind! No, these people believe in what they're doing. They're fanatics. They're not mustache-twirling villains from old Hollywood movies. So the idea of a positive nationhood where all Germans help one another and interact and come to know one another and feel as one with one another, that's one of the positive things that the Nazis offered. Just as on a personal level, Hitler is a bona fide war hero who loves children and dogs, and he actually enjoys sitting down at tea parties with his female friends and gossiping. Hitler thinks of himself as an art. I mean, these are not necessarily evil, and he likes walks in the countryside on Sunday. He's very good to his dogs. So, human beings are complicated. Hitler's the kind of guy I would happily shoot in the head if I met him. I'm not saying anything morally relativistic. I'm trying to explain to you a fact. You can have somebody who's a good guy, who does good things, who still needs to be liquidated for the common good. If the Nazis didn't bring something positive, they would not have succeeded. So, this is one of the more positive things. Now, the flip side of that coin is anti-Semitism, among other things, and the general racialistic policies that Hitler has. So, you've got a hierarchy of races. The Nordic, Germanic peoples are Übermensch, they're the master race. And then you've got the Celts, you got lesser Germans like the Dutch and the English. They're Germans who haven't haven't woken up to their Germanic nature yet. Same with the Norwegians and the Swedes and the Danes. Only the Germans have truly awakened, but the Germans will wake up their cousins in Scandinavia and in England. The Celts will make good secretaries, the Irish, the Welsh, the Scots. They'll make good secretaries, they'll make good butlers and house servants, they'll be good nannies for your children. The French and the olive-skinned peoples of the Mediterranean, the Italians, the Spaniards, they'll also be good servants. And the Spaniards are good soldiers. The Italians, not so much. Not anymore. Although in the old days, they were the Romans. But they can also serve as servants. So we've got the master races and the greater servitor races. The Germanic peoples, and then the Celts, and the sort of Mediterranean olive-skinned people of Europe. Then you've got the natural slave races. According to Hitler, the slave races are the blacks of Africa, the red peoples of America, the yellow peoples of Asia, and the Slavs of Eastern Europe. They argue that the word Slav comes from the old term slave. And while slaves are not master race, they serve a function. They can provide labor. Arabs too, to an extent. And then there are the Untermenschen, the subhumans. And the subhumans obviously include deviants like homosexuals and the mentally ill and the physically handicapped. And of course the gypsies. And anyone who's too devout to their religion. Hitler is going to martyr a few Catholic saints. He's going to martyr several Protestant leaders because they just care too much about Christ and not enough about the Fuhrer. And of course, the gypsies and the Jews. Those are enemies of mankind. They are human cancer. They are parasites. And the problem of the Jews is an existential threat to the Aryan nation, and it needs to be wiped out in some way, shape, or form, taken out of the equation. So anti-Semitism and racial politics. So what is a person to a Christian? They're a child of God. What is a person to a Marxist? They are their socioeconomic class. What is a person to a nationalist, a member of the folk? What is a person to a Nazi? They are their race, their culture, what folk they are a part of. Can you change this? One of the tenets of our system, liberal democracy, is the notion that people can change their destinies. If you are born into a certain life, you can change that by force of will, by choice. You're not born to be a Democrat or a Republican or a rich person or a poor person. You're born into poverty or into wealth, but your choices are going to shape your personal future. Our belief is that the reality is the individual, not the group. But both communists and National Socialists define people by the group. Communists describe people by socioeconomic status. National Socialists and fascists, particularly National Socialists, define people by their group identity, how they are born. Think about the essential injustice of that. You're treating people like dogs. You know what a Chihuahua is capable of when you see it, just like you know what a Newfie is capable of, or a German Shepherd, or a Lap Poodle. Because they're subspecies, the dog subspecies. Canines are very mutable. Comes with them a certain set of qualities. Now, mutes, and standard poodles, of course. Mutes are mutants. What am I saying? Mutts. Mutts are unpredictable because they have mixed bloodlines. But purebloods, pretty predictable, yeah.
Okay. 1, she's a golden mother. 2.
What, she's a mixture of golden retriever and poodle?
Yeah.
But she's a mixture of Royal Standard poodle.
Right.
Yeah, because that's the size.
My other dog, Alan, he's like this big. He's really special. He, well, 2 things. 1, my mom sings to him, and he'll like sing back to her. It's really funny.
Oh, that's nice.
But he was part of like this border lady person who had like 85 dogs up in Honors, and she took like fine care of them. They're all groomed well. And, like,
well, that's good, but it's
it's a
also
lot. Yeah. And so there's a lot of incest with the dogs.
yeah.
And so that's why he's so special. He like.
Yeah, no, it's
we
not
don't know
good for
what
your
he
bloodline.
is.
He's Alvin. He's an Alvin.
He's like a.
No, every time we've had him on, they're all pretty
He looks
unique.
like a rat.
But you're basically pigeonholed into how you're born. Now, the other thing the Nazis stand for is a strong German. And that means overturning Versailles as quickly as possible, as thoroughly as possible, and rearming to the hilt. Because for us to take the Lebensraum we need to become strong enough to beat our enemies. And who's our enemies? Anyone who's not a German. Anyone who's not, if you're not with us, you're against us. So, rearming. Now, 1929, 1930, 1931, 1932. The Great Depression rolls through the world. In the United States, the wealthiest society in the world at that time, 1 man in 4 is out of work without social welfare programs. My grandparents knew people who starved in the Great Depression. People were on the edge of starvation in the United States. That's in America. In Germany, there was real starvation. There was real economic dislocation. People didn't know where their next paycheck was going to come from. They didn't know if they were going to keep their job. They might keep their job, but get cut in hours or cut in pay. Everything was falling apart. And the Weimar Republic's government, which now had President Hindenburg, it's like General Hindenburg took the lead in the Middle and Late War. President Hindenburg is now in charge of the Republic, and he's there to give confidence. But he goes through a series of prime ministers every few months, including a guy named von Schleicher, which means the sneaky one. And nothing works. The communists are fighting in the streets with the Nazis. The communist bully boys wear red shirts. The Nazi bully boys, the Sturmabteilung, the SA, wear brown shirts. So you have the brown shirts versus the red shirts fighting in the streets. KPD, Communist Party of Deutschland, versus NSDAP, National Socialist German Workers' Party. Those are the only 2 parties that are growing, election after election after election. The Germans can call elections whenever they want. So there are a series of prime ministers and a series of elections, and every party is losing ground except for the extremists who are promising revolution and utopia. The communists on the far left and the Nazis, who are considered to be, because of their nationalism, on the far right, even though they're economically socialists. Things are coming out of control. The society is teetering on the edge of real anarchy. So in January 1933, after after 2 failed presidential bids, and just as the Nazi Party begins to be losing membership in the most recent election, they stopped growing, they actually began to shrink slightly. The elite around Hindenburg said, you know what? We're afraid of catching the disease socialism, communist socialism. We can't do that. If we catch communist socialism, we'll have our version of Joe Stalin. We don't want that. What we've got to do is inoculate ourselves against communist socialism. Liberal democracy isn't working. The Depression is a byproduct of Anglo-Saxon capitalism, of liberal democracy, of all that Atlantic stuff. No. What we need to do is take a variant of socialism and inoculate ourselves with it. So, because we're a certain type of socialist, the communist socialist won't be able to get a football. Let's inoculate ourselves against communist socialism with a little bit of National Socialism.
That makes sense.
What we'll do is we'll appoint Hitler as Reichskanzler, as the Imperial Chancellor, as the Prime Minister under Hindenburg. We'll give Hitler the Chancellorship, that's their version of Prime Minister, and we'll give Hitler several spots in the cabinet. Now, Hitler's this little guy with a prison haircut and a Charlie Chaplin mustache, and he's nervous around upper-class people. He's sort of a squirrely guy. He's great in front of a crowd, but get him in a posh setting, and he's sort of like a fish out of water. And what we'll do, we'll control him. We're going to promote him, and then he'll have to ask us for advice on how to lead the country. Did not know who they were messing with. Absolutely no idea the kind of man that they were dealing with. They thought they were dealing with a stuttering army corporal who was good in front of the crowds, but who was really not very bright, and who could be guided, shepherded towards running a nice Germany. So, 30th January 1933, Hitler is appointed Chancellor. And we will take the story from there next time.
Oh.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, okay. We got new shirts.
Hold on.
Oh.
New shirts? Are you talking to me or somebody else? What?
So at Taekwondo, we get shirts every summer. And one of our new one says, a tiger doesn't lose sleep over the opinion of sheep. And I'm like,
that's funny. That's funny.
So much.
That's good. By the way, does anyone have any questions, comments, or thoughts? Okay, then we're done. Thank you.